One of the things that Leanne and I love to do together is play games. It really doesn't matter what kind of game we play. We play things like Seen It or Pictionary or Taboo or Loaded Questions, all these different games that are out there. And we love to play games with my family as well, though we have decided that we will no longer play the newlywed game with our parents. That got awkward fast. But in general, we love to play games. Now, one thing I will have to tell you about myself, though, and Leanne will back me up on this, is that I can be a little competitive when it comes to games. I like to win, and I try very hard to win. I work hard to win when I play. And I like to think that I'm a pretty good sport when I lose. No comments? But in general, I like to win and do everything I can to try to do that. Unfortunately, though, my parents and my sister and Leanne also all like to win. And as bad luck would have it, in the early days when we all started playing games together, I won a lot. Like every time we played, kind of a lot. Like it didn't matter what game we played or how long it took us to play it. For some reason, I always ended up coming out on top. Now, why would that be bad luck, you might ask? Well, because ever since then, whenever we play, it doesn't matter to them who wins as long as it's not me. I feel like a hunter surrounded by deer. I mean, they are just out to get me. and so, as you can imagine, it can get a little stressful playing games. I mean, for a competitive guy to have everyone gunning for him, it can get a little stressful. And there's one particular type of game that gets really stressful for me. And it's one that includes something that looks a little like this. Does anybody know what this is? Hourglass, you might call it like the sands of time or something like that. Exactly. You know, games that have something that like this that just kind of runs out the clock. Because for me, and maybe you're the same way with this, whenever I see that little device right there, it just starts to make me nervous. I start asking questions. I start saying to myself, like, when is it going to be finished? How much more time do I have? Am I going to be able to do everything I need to do before the time runs out? How much time do I have? Well, those questions right there are applicable to other parts of our lives beyond just playing games. And one of the places that questions like that can become incredibly relevant is when it comes to heaven. You see, for so many of us, one of the biggest struggles we have when it comes to heaven is the question that kind of constantly goes through our mind of when do I get to go to heaven? Or maybe more accurately, when do I get to experience heaven? How long will it take before I get to experience this better place, before I leave this place? How much time do I have left? How much longer do I have to endure this agony that sometimes I go through? When do I get to go to heaven? When do I get to experience heaven? Well, the interesting thing is that question has an obvious answer that we all know. We get to go to heaven once we die. So I think there's another question that bugs at us. And that's, why do I have to wait? If God has this better place out there, this place that's free of pain and sorrow and sadness, this place that's full of hope and joy and peace, this place where I get to reconnect with all my loved ones, where I get to have an unbroken relationship with God, why do I have to wait? Why can't I just experience that better place now? It's like I used to say to myself, when we ask ourselves questions throughout our lives, why do we have to wait for things? Why do we have to wait for the sands of time to run out? Why do we have to wait for that date to call us back? When I was a teenager, I used to ask myself, how long do I have to look like this? How long? Why do I have to wait? Why can't I have that better stuff now? Well, it reminds me of a story of when I was a kid. See, when I was a kid, we lived very close to Busch Gardens. And so one of the things that my mom and dad would do is they'd get season passes to Busch Gardens every now and then. And we'd go and really have some fun. And as you know, for a kid, Busch Gardens is like the most amazing place in the entire world, next to Disneyland, of course. And so one morning, my mom woke me up and she got me all excited because she said, Brandon, we're going to Busch Gardens today. And so I'm like jumping out of bed, ready to go. And she says, the only thing is, before we go, I need to do some shopping. I wanted to go shopping with my mom about as much as I wanted to watch Young and the Restless with my grandmother. I mean, it's just not on my list. But we had to go, and so because she was forcing me to go there instead of Busch Gardens, I decided that I would try to hurry up this process. I would try to kind of aggravate her so that she'd just want to get to Busch Gardens faster and get done with that shopping thing. And what I decided to do is I decided to pout and look a little bit like this for the entire morning. And so throughout the entire shopping experience, I decided everything she showed me, I was going to reject it. So she'd come up to me and she'd be like, Brandon, you like this shirt? No. Well, Brandon, what do you think of these pants? No. Well, Brandon, do you think I should buy this sweater? No. And then she finally said to me, you know, Brandon, if I could find something I liked, we'd get out of here a lot faster. And so then I changed my entire strategy. And everything she showed me, I liked it. So Brandon, how does this sweater look? Great. How do I look in these pants? Beautiful. Do you think I should buy this shirt? Absolutely. Well, after about an hour of this, I realized for the first time in my life that my mom is so much smarter than me. And mom always wins. But the reason I got so frustrated that day is because I knew there was something better. I knew that the place I was not the best place that I could possibly be. And I kept asking myself, how much longer? Why can't I be in this better place now? And when it comes to heaven, that's the question that we sometimes ask. Maybe not why can't I be in heaven now, but why can't I experience heaven now? You know, if God has this better place in store for us, this better place where there is peace and love and joy and no pain, why can't we have it now? And when we have to wait, when we know that better place exists and yet we're stuck here, just like I got frustrated with my mom, sometimes we can get a little frustrated with God. We wonder why God just won't let us have that good stuff now. Why we've got to wait for it. Why we've got to endure all this other stuff before we can have this better stuff. Well, that's exactly what Colton's dad is going through as he watches his son sit in surgery in the book, Heaven is for Real. You know, as his son is in surgery and in heaven with God kind of simultaneously, his dad is sitting there in a waiting room in agony. I mean, any of you who've had your child be in such pain that you had no control over, you probably know exactly what he's going through. And the whole time he's wrestling. He's wrestling with that question, why? You know, he knows God has a better place out there. He knows God has the power to bring nothing but peace and healing and joy. And yet for some reason he's stuck here. And after a while of watching his son suffer and knowing God can make it all go away, he just gets a little angry and a little frustrated at God. And so I want to show you a little video clip here of him talking about that experience, and just so you can see kind of the questions and the emotions he goes through in that moment. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever asked questions like those? You know, why, God? Why did I lose my job? Why did my marriage fall apart? Why did my mom get sick? Why did my child get hurt? Why do all these bad things happen in my life? About a month ago, many of us were asking a similar question as we watched that tragedy in Connecticut unfold. We were asking, God, why do things like this happen to children? Where is your plan in all of this? Why do we have to endure this sort of stuff? Because the struggle for us is when we know that God has something so much better in store for us, we wonder why we have to go through this stuff. It's part of the reason we sing songs like that opening song we had this morning. You know, open the eyes of my heart, Lord, because I want to see you. I want to understand. If I'm going to be suffering in this world, I at least want a glimpse of the better stuff. I want a glimpse of heaven. I want to know what it feels like, because sometimes here it can be so hard. But you know what the interesting thing is about all this? The ironic thing I find about it, maybe even a kind of a funny thing, is it's funny to me that as bad as we might think this world is sometimes, and as hard as this life may feel, and as much better as we know heaven is, none of us is jumping to leave this place. You know, as much better as heaven is than the place we are right now, none of us is jumping to go to heaven right now. Like if I were to ask you to raise your hands and just have a show of hands, if I offered you a free pass to heaven right now, you know, of course you'd have to die in order for that to happen. But once you did, you'd go straight to heaven, be right there with God. How many of you would raise your hands and jump at that without any question, without any hesitation? We wouldn't. For most of us, we couldn't. Because as bad as this world can be sometimes, as tough as this world is, for some reason, we're attached to it. We need to be here. We want to be here. We just can't let go of this place. But the question is why? What's holding us here? What makes us want to stay so badly when we know something so much better awaits us? Well, I think the Bible might be able to answer that question. Last year for my Bible reading plan, I read through the entire Bible in a year, and one of the things you can imagine about that is that you don't get to read any passage of the Bible very in depth because you're kind of going through the whole thing. And so this year I decided to do a different strategy. For the month of January, I'm just going to focus on one book and learn it really, really well. And so every day throughout January, I've read through the entire book of Philippians. It's about 4 chapters, so it's not a really long book, but I just want to really learn this book inside and out. And for those of you who don't know, Philippians is a letter written to a church in a town called Philippi by a man named Paul. And so as I read through this letter each and every day, there's this one passage that always stands out to me, that always catches my attention and stops me in my tracks. And I want to show that to you right now because I think it applies to what we're talking about. It says this. It says, for me, and this is Paul talking, he says, for me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I'm to go on living in this body, this will mean fruitful labor for me, and that's a good thing. And yet what shall I choose? I don't know. Because I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is so much better by far. And yet I know that it is necessary for you that I remain in the body. In other words, to decipher that a little bit, what Paul is saying here is that the best thing he can think of, the thing he wants to do more than anything else in the world, is to die and go and be in heaven with Jesus. Because he knows it's so much better. And yet as much as he wants to do it, and as better as he knows it is, he doesn't. He stays. He doesn't find any way to hasten this life. He doesn't find some way to quickly be executed. He doesn't go call the emperor's mama some bad name just so he can hasten his way out of this world. He stays. And again, the question, just like for us, is why? Well, about 3 years ago, I figured out the answer to that question. You see, 3 years ago this month was the first time that I ever went down to Florida City to visit Branches, the ministry that's down there that we're going to go to for this mission trip. And the reason I went down was because I was going on what's called an advance trip, which is where a pastor will go down and check out a mission beforehand to make sure everything's good, to figure out what the trip's going to look like, to make sure the mission is a right fit for the church. And so I went down for about 3 days to scope this place out. And if you've ever heard me talk about Branches, I'm sure you can imagine that I had an amazing experience, a life-changing experience. You know, I was blown away by the amazing ministry that these people were doing and the palpable presence of God in this place. It changed me forever. And yet, as much as being down there changed me, it was something that happened on the way home that really, really impacted me. You see, on the way home, I was flying back, and for about the first hour of the flight, everything was fine. But about an hour in, thousands of feet up in the air, all of a sudden we hit a patch of turbulence. And I'm not talking just, those few little bumps and your glass shakes kind of turbulence. I'm talking the kind of turbulence that makes the lights flicker, makes your stomach sick, and makes you start asking those final questions to yourself. This is what it looked like out my window. Over there is the wing, if you can see it. And I did begin to ask some of those final questions because in a moment it became very apparent to me that my life on this planet might not be as long as I thought it would be. My trip to heaven might be happening a lot faster than I thought it was going to be. And whenever you come to those moments where you're faced with your mortality, you begin to ask some interesting questions. And I don't know if you've ever been in that moment, but I have a feeling, based on my experience, that it's one of those moments you can't imagine what you're going to think until you're there. And what I thought in that moment totally surprised me. You see, in that moment, I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with both a sense of clarity in my mind and a pain in my gut. I was filled with fear and grief and regret and revelation. But it wasn't over the things that I imagined. You see, in that moment, I wasn't overwhelmed with fear because I was afraid of crashing in the pain of death. I wasn't afraid of that. I wasn't afraid in that moment of where I was going to end up if I did die. I felt okay about that. I wasn't even afraid in that moment of all the people I was going to leave behind who I loved. Even Leanne, who I was only 4 months away from marrying. For some reason, not even that caused me the greatest fear. The thing that caused me the greatest fear in that moment was the realization to myself that if I died in that moment, if that was my last moment on earth, that I was terrified that my life would have been a waste. You see, I'd just been to a place like Branches where you watch God doing amazing things right in front of your face. And I realized that God had something so much bigger and so much better out there in store. That God had plans for my life that I hadn't even yet tapped into. And yet here I could be moments away from all that ending without being able to do any of that stuff. And it terrified me that if I found myself in heaven in that moment, looking into the eyes of God, that I could not expect to hear words like, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Yours was a life fully lived. You did everything that I planned for you." Because I wasn't even confident in that answer myself. I knew there was so much more in store. And I hadn't even scratched the surface. I was afraid that I was going to leave this world full of regret. My friends, do not allow yourself to leave this world full of regret. Do not miss out on all the amazing things God has planned for you and God has on the horizon for your life. The reason that Paul in that passage says that he needs to stay on earth instead of going to heaven, which is where he totally wants to be, is because he knows that God has so much more in store for him. That God has so many more plans for his life, that he has so many more lives to change through Paul. And Paul realizes that he's just not done yet. And the question that we need to ask ourselves every single day is am I done yet? Have I done everything that God has planned for my life? If I found myself in heaven today, could I expect to hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You did everything I had planned for you. Yours was a life fully lived." Because if we can't say yes to all those questions, then we shouldn't waste one more minute building up regret. My friends, heaven is a place that is absolutely amazing, and I can't wait to get there. But the reality is, what we have to remember is that God has plans for us here. Earth isn't just this run out the clock kind of scenario. But God has placed us here on a mission. A mission to spread God's love to others so that they can do the same. A mission to change people's lives because God is a part of our life. A mission to go out there and to teach others about this different, better way of life that Jesus offers, that someday people might not have to ask the question, when do we get to go to heaven or when do we get to experience heaven? Because God's kingdom has come here on earth just like Jesus promised. May you leave this place and may you uncover God's plan for your life. May you uncover the things God still has yet for you to do, and may you pursue them with every ounce of your being. Maybe that means going to a place like Florida City and seeing maybe what God has to open your eyes up to down there. Maybe it means helping out at a place like the Cortland Community Center, this amazing ministry, to see if God can use you right here in this community. Maybe it's getting involved in one of the ministries going on here in the church to begin to unravel God's plan for your life. Whatever it is, may you figure it out and may you pursue it. May you find that you live a life with no regrets left behind. May you find that someday you stand in heaven before God and hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You did everything I planned for you." And may the work that you do here in this world bring it about so that your children's children and their children may someday not have to ask questions like, when do we get to experience heaven? Because of what God has done through you, God's kingdom has come to earth. Amen.